19 years old, dressed in silk, crowned as a bride of Rome. But before the marriage could begin, the ritual would begin. Tonight, we descend into a wedding night so brutal, so methodical, that even Roman historians avoided writing about it. A night where witnesses stood in shadows. Priests whispered over trembling brides. And intimacy was transformed into legal evidence. This was not love. This was law wrapped in religion, obedience carved into flesh, tradition enforced under torchlight, hidden in fragments of ancient manuscripts, condemned by later writers, and buried beneath centuries of silence. This ritual exposes a darker machinery behind Roman marriage, one built on proof, power, and possession. And what happened inside those marble chambers was never meant to be remembered. So before we open the chamber doors, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the histories we uncover here are the ones the world tried hardest to erase. Now, let us begin the night Rome claimed its bride. The night Rome claimed her, she was dressed as a bride, but processed like property. 7 witnesses waited, not to bless the union, but to record it. In Rome, marriage was not love's beginning. It was obedience's first trial. The year is 89 CE, under the cold administrative gaze of Emperor Domitian, and Rome breathes in rituals the way it breathes in conquest, methodical, unquestioned, absolute. Flavia is 19, newly married, veiled in saffron silk that glows under torchlight like a flame prepared for sacrifice. Her name spoken proudly hours earlier in the wedding chants, yet now reduced to whispers as she is escorted deeper into her husband's domus, away from music, away from laughter, into the part of marriage Roman poets never described. Her bare feet touch marble polished by generations of ceremonies, just like this one. The stone so cold it seems to drink warmth from her bones. And she realizes too late that every joyful tradition, the walnuts tossed, the bridal songs, the carrying across the threshold, were merely decorations masking what waited beyond the final door. When it closes behind her, the sound is heavy, judicial, final, like a verdict being sealed. The chamber smells of oil smoke and aged wood, torches hissing along the walls, their light revealing not intimacy, but arrangement. 7 figures already present, positioned with deliberate spacing, silent as statues, yet far more suffocating. They are not family. They are not friends. They are witnesses. Rome trusts witnesses more than gods. A senior matron, the pronuba, stands closest, her grip firm when she takes Flavia's trembling hands, the grip of someone accustomed not to comforting brides, but managing procedures. And her voice carries the calm authority of tradition when she says, "You are in your husband's house now," a sentence that sounds less like welcome and more like transfer of ownership. Flavia's eyes wander despite herself, drawn toward a shape in the chamber's corner, tall, draped in heavy cloth, positioned with ceremonial care, and the unease in her stomach deepens because no one explains it. No one reassures her, and in Rome silence is often more frightening than cruelty. Her mother's voice returns to her mind then, from the morning braiding of her hair, hands shaking, eyes wet, whispering words that felt strange at the time. Do not resist. No matter what they ask, do not resist. And only now does Flavia understand why that warning carried grief heavier than farewell. Outside, faint but audible, men still shout crude wedding songs in the street, claiming tradition, claiming spirit-warding noise. But here inside the chamber, the atmosphere is clinical, reverent in the way courtrooms are reverent, because this night is not romance, it is verification. Rome does not assume purity, it documents it. Rome does not trust vows, it proves them. The pronuba guides Flavia forward, step by step, positioning her under torchlight, where every movement can be observed, corrected, remembered later, if testimony is required. And Flavia becomes aware that she is not being honored, she is being processed. A priest stands near the wall, murmuring preparatory prayers, not for love but for legality, while female slaves wait with basins, cloths, and oils arranged like surgical tools, their expressions blank with repetition. The draped object looms closer now, its presence dominating the room with silent expectation, and when the pronuba finally gestures toward it, instructing Flavia to unveil what lies beneath, her hands hesitate only a fraction before obedience overrides fear, because Roman girls are raised on one unbreakable rule: survival belongs to those who comply. The cloth falls. What stands revealed is not gentle, not symbolic, but unmistakably explicit. A carved wooden effigy of Mutunus Tutunus, the archaic fertility deity rarely spoken of outside ritual context, his form exaggerated, confronting, impossible to misinterpret. The room does not react. This is normal to them. To Flavia, it is the moment childhood ends. The pronuba's voice lowers to instructive calm, explaining what must be done to receive the god's blessing before her husband may lawfully approach her, and the words feel less like religion and more like procedure wrapped in sacred language. Flavia's heartbeat roars in her ears as realization settles with suffocating weight. Tonight is not simply about becoming a wife. It is about proving she is worthy to be one. Body first, dignity last. The witnesses step closer. The priest raises his hands. The torches crackle louder in the silence. And as the pronuba positions her before the ancient statue, guiding her posture with practiced precision, Flavia understands with chilling clarity that Rome is watching. And Rome is about to begin. The god behind the curtain, the veil had fallen. But the ritual had only begun. Before her husband could claim her, a god would claim proof first. In Rome, even purity needed witnesses. The cloth slipped from Flavia's trembling fingers and collapsed onto the marble floor with a dull whisper, revealing the towering wooden figure beneath, its carved surface polished by generations of ceremonies, its form exaggerated with unsettling intention. And in that moment, the chamber seemed to shrink, the torches flickering as if reacting to her rising dread. No one spoke immediately. Silence was part of the ritual. Silence forced realization to settle slowly, painfully, like cold water filling the lungs. The pronuba stepped closer, her sandals scraping softly against stone, and placed firm hands upon Flavia's shoulders, guiding her forward with practiced control, not cruel, but entirely devoid of comfort, the touch of someone executing tradition rather than protecting innocence. The priest's voice rose in low Latin chants behind them, rhythmic and procedural, calling upon fertility gods to witness what mortal eyes already gathered to record. Flavia's breath grew shallow as she stood before the statue of Mutunus Tutunus, the ancient fertility deity rarely named in polite Roman conversation, yet central to bridal initiation rites, whispered about only among matrons. The carving left nothing symbolic. It was explicit, deliberate, instructional. This was not a relic. This was an instrument of ritual verification. You must ask his blessing, the pronuba murmured near her ear, voice steady, emotionless. Only then may your husband approach you lawfully. The words struck heavier than chains. Behind her, the 7 witnesses adjusted their positions, ensuring clear lines of sight. Rome documented everything: land, contracts, earths, and marriage was no exception. Especially not the bride. Especially not her body. Flavia's hands shook violently as the pronuba guided her posture, correcting the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her chin, even the placement of her feet, arranging her like ceremonial furniture before the carved god. The priest lifted a bronze censer, incense smoke rising thick into the chamber air, wrapping the scene in perfumed haze, meant to sanctify what could not be softened. The instructions came quietly, but unmistakably. This was not prayer. This was participation. Flavia hesitated, only for a heartbeat, but hesitation did not stop the ritual. The pronuba's grip tightened slightly, not painful, but absolute, reinforcing the only rule Roman daughters were raised to obey: compliance ensured survival. So she obeyed. The witnesses did not look away. Their duty was observation. Later, if ever questioned, they would testify that tradition had been followed exactly, that the bride had fulfilled her obligation without resistance. Time distorted inside the chamber. Seconds stretched into suffocating eternities as the ritual unfolded under torchlight. The priest's chants continuing like legal incantations, sanctifying each movement as though holiness could erase humiliation. When it ended, there was no applause, no blessing, no relief, only procedure. Slaves stepped forward instantly, washing Flavia's hands and arms with scented oils and warm water, a symbolic purification marking the completion of divine acknowledgement. They avoided her eyes. Whether from pity or conditioning, even they did not know anymore. The priest concluded his invocation with a final murmured line, sealing the fertility rite as complete. But the atmosphere did not lighten. If anything, it darkened, because everyone in the chamber understood a chilling truth. The god's blessing was only the first verification. Rome required another. Flavia barely had time to steady her breathing before movement at the chamber's edge drew her gaze. The physician, silent until now, stepped forward carrying a leather satchel worn smooth by years of similar nights. His expression detached, clinical, untouched by the gravity crushing the bride before him. To him, this was not sacred. It was administrative. The pronuba turned Flavia gently, but firmly away from the statue, guiding her toward a linen-draped space prepared beside the chamber wall. And dread pulled heavier in her stomach as she realized the ritual had only shifted form from divine initiation to physical inspection. The witnesses followed. The priest remained. The torches burned brighter. And as the physician opened his satchel, metal instruments clinking softly inside, Flavia understood with rising horror. Rome was not finished with her yet. Proof before flesh, the god had been satisfied. But Rome was not. Blessings meant nothing without documentation. Before the husband, before the bed, the law demanded proof. The linen curtain swayed softly as Flavia was guided behind it, yet the thin fabric offered no real privacy, only the illusion of modesty. And that illusion dissolved the moment the witnesses repositioned themselves outside its edge, their shadows visible in the torchlight, like carved figures etched into stone. The pronuba's hands never left Flavia's arms, steadying her not with kindness, but with procedural certainty, positioning her exactly where she was required to stand, because even vulnerability had an assigned place within Roman order. The physician stepped forward, his leather satchel resting on a low wooden table, its clasps opening with a dull metallic click that echoed louder than it should have in the suffocating quiet. He did not greet her. He did not soften his expression. To him, this was not a frightened 19-year-old bride. This was a legal verification already scheduled, already expected, already routine. The priest remained visible beyond the curtain, murmuring low prayers, not for comfort, but for ritual legitimacy, ensuring divine observance overlapped with legal scrutiny, because Rome preferred redundancy when it came to control. Sacred and civic authority intertwined seamlessly here, leaving no space where a bride might exist unexamined. Flavia's pulse thundered in her ears as the pronuba instructed her to remain still, voice calm, almost bored, the tone of someone who had overseen dozens, perhaps hundreds, of such nights. The slaves entered quietly, placing basins of warm water, folded cloths, and oil lamps at precise angles to maximize visibility, because visibility was the point. Nothing about this moment was meant to be hidden. The physician removed instruments from his satchel one by one, arranging them methodically, metal glinting under torchlight, their clinical presence stripping away any lingering illusion that this was ceremonial rather than procedural. He spoke only once, brief, direct, instructing compliance in the same tone a magistrate might use when reviewing documents. Flavia swallowed her fear and obeyed. Her mother's warning echoed again. Do not resist, and resistance here would not preserve dignity. It would only complicate the record. Roman law valued documentation above discomfort. A bride's suffering did not invalidate procedure. It merely accompanied it. The examination began with detached efficiency. The physician worked quickly, clinically, narrating observations aloud so the witnesses beyond the curtain could hear. Each detail spoken in precise language, stripped of emotion, converted into verifiable testimony. A scribe etched notes into a wax tablet nearby, stylus scratching softly, recording the condition of the bride as though cataloging property prior to transfer. Flavia stared upward, focusing on the ceiling beams to escape the humiliation unfolding below. Her breathing shallow, hands clenched at her sides as the reality settled deeper. She was not being cared for. She was being certified. The physician paused once when she flinched, not out of concern but irritation, waiting only until stillness returned before continuing his inspection. To him, discomfort was interference, not tragedy. Minutes stretched unbearably. Then, just as abruptly as it began, it ended. He stepped back, wiping his hands with linen, expression unchanged, and spoke his conclusion in clear, formal tone. Verification of virginity confirmed prior to consummation. Readiness recorded according to marital law. The scribe inscribed the statement. The witnesses murmured agreement. The priest lowered his head in ritual acknowledgement. It was done. Or rather, it was documented. The slaves moved forward again, cleansing Flavia's hands and arms, as though resetting her for the next stage, perfumed water masking the scent of fear that clung to her skin. No one asked if she was well. Wellness was irrelevant. Compliance had been achieved. The pronuba nodded with quiet approval, signaling the successful completion of the preparatory rites, and the words she spoke next chilled Flavia more than the marble beneath her feet. The bride is ready. Ready. Not emotionally. Not spiritually. Legally. The curtain was drawn aside fully now, removing even symbolic privacy, and Flavia was guided back into the main chamber where the marriage bed awaited, draped in ceremonial linens, illuminated by deliberately bright oil lamps, positioned so nothing would be concealed in shadow. The witnesses adjusted once more, forming silent sentinels near the doorway. The priest closed his prayer scroll. The physician sealed his tablet record. And as footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond, heavy, approaching, Flavia realized the most personal part of the night had not yet begun. Her husband was entering, and Rome intended to witness everything. The open-door consummation, the bed was prepared, but privacy was forbidden. The door would remain open, so Rome could listen. Tonight, intimacy would become evidence. The chamber shifted the moment Marcus Petronius Rufus entered, his footsteps echoing against marble like the arrival of an official rather than a husband, his shadow stretching long across the torch-lit floor until it reached the edge of the marriage bed where Flavia sat rigid, hands clenched into the linen sheets. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, his gaze moved first to the pronuba, then to the priest, then briefly toward the witnesses stationed near the open doorway, as if seeking confirmation that he was performing correctly, that he too was bound by the machinery of this ritual. The realization unsettled Flavia. He looked less like a conqueror and more like a man being examined alongside her. The pronuba stepped forward, voice steady, ceremonial, reciting the formal declaration spoken across generations of Roman unions. The gods have blessed the bride. The rites are complete. Let the marriage be consummated according to Roman law. The words did not sound sacred. They sounded administrative, like the final authorization before a contract was activated. The oil lamps were deliberately adjusted brighter by the slaves, their flames intensifying until shadows retreated to the chamber edges. Darkness was not permitted. Concealment implied deception. Rome required visibility even in its most private acts. Flavia's breath caught as she realized the door remained fully open. Beyond its frame stood the witnesses, not inside, yet close enough, positioned where sound traveled clearly through the corridor, their presence unmistakable. They did not need to see. Hearing was sufficient. Documentation required confirmation that consummation occurred, Not affection, not gentleness, only proof. Marcus finally moved toward her, slow, measured, his ceremonial tunic heavy with embroidered trim that marked his status, but did nothing to disguise the tension in his shoulders. When he sat beside her, the bed frame creaked under the added weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet. He glanced at her once, briefly, not with tenderness, but with shared unease. Both of them were being watched. Both of them were performing roles older than themselves. His hand lifted hesitantly before resting on her shoulder, the gesture unsure, almost rehearsed. And Flavia realized with strange clarity that this ritual diminished him too, reducing husband to executor, intimacy to obligation. The pronuba cleared her throat softly from across the room, the signal to proceed. There would be no delay. Flavia lay back slowly, because there was nowhere else to go, her pulse hammering against her ribs as the torchlight burned relentlessly above her, illuminating everything, refusing mercy through shadow. The witnesses outside shifted slightly, adjusting their stance as though preparing to listen more carefully, and the priest lowered his gaze, not from modesty, but from ritual protocol, his role complete until verification resumed. Marcus tried to be gentle. That surprised her. His movements were cautious, uncertain, glancing once toward the doorway again, as if fearful of doing something incorrectly, rather than fearful of hurting her. Perhaps he had been instructed too, guided by older men, by law, by expectation, taught that consummation was less about union and more about confirmation. The act itself unfolded under the weight of observation, stripped of intimacy by the knowledge that every sound, every movement carried legal consequence. Flavia's mind detached from her body, focusing instead on the oil lamps swaying slightly above, their flames bending with faint drafts, because focusing on anything else was unbearable. When it ended abruptly, not with closeness, not with whispered reassurance, but with procedural stillness. Marcus withdrew quickly, almost relieved, adjusting his garments with visible discomfort, avoiding her eyes again, as though unsure what expression belonged on his face. But the room did not relax. It reset. The slaves entered immediately, efficient, silent, replacing linens, offering cloths, restoring order to the bed, like attendants preparing a stage for its next performance. Flavia barely had time to gather the sheet around herself before footsteps approached once more. The physician returned. His presence chilled the air faster than the marble floor ever could. He carried the wax tablet prepared earlier, along with fresh instruments, his expression unchanged, because for him the consummation was not complete until medically verified. Marcus stepped aside without protest. The witnesses leaned closer in the corridor. The pronuba folded her hands with satisfied patience. And as the physician set down his satchel at the bedside, preparing to confirm what Rome demanded documented beyond doubt, Flavia realized the most invasive part of the night was only beginning. Verification of ownership, the act was finished. But Rome required confirmation. What happened on the bed was not enough. It had to be proven. In this empire, a bride's body was evidence, and evidence was inspected. The chamber, which should have softened after consummation, instead hardened into colder purpose as the physician approached the bedside, his sandals striking marble with quiet authority, the leather satchel in his hand swaying slightly like a judge's ledger rather than a healer's kit. Flavia clutched the linen sheet tighter around herself, her knuckles pale beneath torchlight, yet modesty held no legal weight here, only compliance did. Marcus had already stepped aside, adjusting his robe, his role momentarily concluded, leaving her alone beneath the gaze of ritual, law, and documentation. The pronuba gave a small nod, permission granted. The physician placed his satchel upon a wooden stand and opened it with the same mechanical precision he had shown earlier, metal instruments glinting in the lamplight as though eager to resume their function. His expression remained distant, untouched by empathy, because what lay before him was not trauma. It was procedure continuing its expected sequence. The witnesses had not dispersed. They remained positioned beyond the open doorway, silhouettes rigid against the corridor glow, their duty unfinished until verification was spoken aloud and recorded. Rome trusted no private claims. Only witness declarations held weight in courts, in inheritance disputes, in legitimacy trials that might arise years later. Flavia's breathing shallowed as the physician gestured for the sheet to be lowered, his tone clinical, brief, as though instructing the repositioning of an object rather than addressing a human being. She hesitated for half a heartbeat, instinct, shame, fear colliding, but the Pronuba's presence behind her reinforced expectation without words. So again, she obeyed. The examination resumed with detached efficiency, the physician narrating observations aloud for the benefit of those listening beyond the chamber walls, his voice stripped of emotion, converting flesh into testimony. A slave stood ready beside him, stylus poised above fresh wax, recording each spoken confirmation so it could be sealed into legal memory. This is not medicine, Flavia realized in numb clarity. This is inventory. The physician worked swiftly, his movements practiced, unembarrassed, pausing only when necessary to ensure accuracy rather than comfort. Marcus stood nearby, avoiding direct eye contact, rubbing his hands together in visible unease, perhaps disturbed by the intrusion yet unwilling, or unable, to challenge it, because Rome's authority outranked personal discomfort. When Flavia flinched slightly, the physician did not apologize. He simply waited for stillness before continuing, his patience procedural, not compassionate. Moments stretched painfully until at last he stepped back, wiping his instruments with linen before returning them to the satchel. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the pause before judgment. Then he spoke. Consummation verified. The words fell into the chamber like a stamped seal on parchment. The slave inscribed the statement. The witnesses murmured acknowledgement. The Pronuba exhaled in quiet approval. It was finished. Not the night, but the proof. Immediately, the chamber shifted into restoration mode. Slaves replaced linens, adjusted lamps, and poured scented water into bronze basins, washing Flavia's arms and hands as though cleansing her not from intimacy, but from inspection. The physician sealed the wax tablet, imprinting it with an official mark before handing it to the scribe for storage. A legal record now existed of her body's transition. If ever challenged, 7 witnesses, a priest, a Pronuba, and a physician would testify to this night in exact detail. Marcus approached her then, slower this time, murmuring something about rest, about the night being over, his voice attempting gentleness, now that observation had ended. But Flavia barely heard him. Because she understood something he did not. This ritual was never about union. It was about ownership. The witnesses began to disperse at last, their duty fulfilled, their testimony secured, leaving the chamber emptier, yet no less heavy. The lamps dimmed slightly, shadows reclaiming the walls, as if secrecy returned only after documentation was complete. Marcus left briefly to speak with attendants, leaving Flavia alone on the bed, wrapped in linen, staring at the marble floor where torchlight flickered like distant flames. She thought the ordeal had ended. She was wrong. Because beyond the chamber, beyond the sealed tablet and departing witnesses, lay expectations that would stretch not for one night, but for the rest of her life. And as the final witness footsteps faded down the corridor, Flavia realized with chilling certainty, Rome had not just witnessed her marriage. It had claimed her entirely. Why history buried it, Rome recorded everything. Yet this ritual faded into silence. Ancient writers mentioned it, then quickly looked away. Some traditions were too brutal, even for empire to remember. The chamber finally emptied, yet its presence lingered inside Flavia, like a shadow that would never fully withdraw. The torches now dimmed to low embers, as servants quietly reset the space for future ceremonies, future brides, future nights identical in structure but forgotten in name. She remained seated on the edge of the marriage bed, Long after Marcus departed, linen wrapped around her shoulders, the silence pressing heavier now than the witnesses had moments before, because observation at least gave shape to suffering. Solitude left it echoing. Outside, Rome continued breathing as if nothing had happened. Laughter drifted faintly from distant streets, where wedding celebrations still lingered. Musicians finishing songs meant to symbolize joy, fertility, prosperity. The contrast felt almost cruel. Two Romes existed simultaneously, one public and celebratory, the other hidden behind chamber doors, where law, religion, and power fused into rituals few dared describe openly. And that secrecy would become deliberate. Centuries later, when historians attempted to reconstruct Roman marital customs, they found only fragments, passing mentions buried in uncomfortable passages. Brief condemnations written by early Christian scholars who described the fertility rites with visible disgust yet avoided detail. One of the most cited voices, Augustine of Hippo, referenced the bridal initiation involving the fertility god Mutonus Tutunus, noting that brides were required to participate in a ritual offering before consummation. But even he, writing to dismantle pagan practice, did not linger on specifics. It was as if the act itself resisted documentation. Archaeological traces remained, carved fertility figures unearthed from domestic shrines, inscriptions referencing marital verification rites, legal tablets outlining witness requirements for consummation disputes, but never full descriptions, never complete narratives, because Rome preferred glory remembered, not humiliation. Marriage, to Roman law, was a contract governing inheritance, citizenship legitimacy, property continuity. A bride's body functioned as legal infrastructure, the vessel through which lineage flowed. Verification rituals existed not from cruelty alone, but from obsession with certainty. In a society where inheritance disputes could fracture noble houses, proof of virginity and consummation held enormous political weight. Yet even within that pragmatic system, discomfort lingered. Poets avoided it, statesmen ignored it. Historians summarized it in sanitized language. The ritual survived in practice far longer than it survived in literature, gradually softening as imperial culture shifted, as Christianity replaced pagan fertility rites, as privacy gained moral value. By late antiquity, such ceremonies had diminished, replaced by symbolic blessings rather than physical verification. But they were never formally abolished. They simply disappeared, buried beneath evolving morality, erased by selective memory. Modern historians piece together the truth only by cross-referencing scattered sources, legal commentaries, theological criticisms, fertility cult artifacts, domestic ritual carvings, assembling fragments like bones of a buried skeleton. No single manuscript preserved the full sequence. Only reconstruction revealed its shape. And that shape was unsettling, because it exposed a civilization capable of architectural brilliance, legal innovation, and philosophical depth, yet equally capable of institutionalizing humiliation under the banner of order. Back in the dim bridal chamber of 89 CE, Flavia lay down at last, exhaustion overtaking shock, her body still while her thoughts churned violently. She understood now what her mother's trembling hands had tried to communicate. Marriage was not sanctuary. It was absorption, not into love, but into system. The lamps faded one by one until darkness reclaimed the room. Yet the ritual's imprint would remain long after flame and witness were gone, echoing in expectations placed upon her, in the sons she would be required to bear, in the silence she would maintain about this night. Because Roman wives did not speak of initiation, they endured it. History would do the same. For nearly 2,000 years, this ritual lingered only in fragments, half erased, half remembered, a shadow beneath Rome's grand narrative, until modern excavation, translation, and scholarship dragged it back into light. And what that light revealed was not romance, not sacred union, but a civilization so obsessed with control, it turned even the wedding night into a courtroom.